The summer heat lingered heavily in the air as Shaquille O'Neal exited the gym after a grueling practice session. At 7'1" and built like a fortress, Shaq's frame seemed larger than life, his every step commanding attention. Fans and kids alike often waited outside for a chance to catch a glimpse of him, maybe even get an autograph or a picture. It was something he never took for granted. He loved his fans. But today was different. As Shaq wiped the sweat from his brow and headed toward his car, a sharp voice cut through the usual hum of cheers and chatter. "Hey, Shaq!" He turned to see a woman in her mid-40s approaching him quickly. Her steps were determined, her face set in a mix of frustration and pain. Shaq paused, curious, offering his trademark smile. "What's up, ma'am? You good?" She didn't return the smile. Instead, she stopped in front of him, shaking her head. "No, I'm not good." Her voice trembled slightly, but carried a weight that caught Shaq off guard. "You know what?" she began, her voice rising as she pointed at him. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Shaq blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me? You're out here, a superstar, selling shoes to kids for hundreds of dollars. Kids who look up to you. Kids like my son." The woman's voice cracked with emotion. "He wants to be just like you, Shaq. He begs me for those shoes, but you think I can afford them? You think single mothers like me have $150 to waste on sneakers?" Shaq opened his mouth to respond, but the woman didn't stop. "You're a role model. Do you even know what that means? You've forgotten where you came from. You were once one of these kids." Shaq felt the words hit him like a punch to the chest. He had grown up poor, too. He remembered the struggles, the days his family barely scraped by. He thought of his stepfather, Philip Harrison, working long hours to put food on the table, and his mother, Lucille, sacrificing her own needs to ensure her children had everything they could. His throat tightened. The woman's words were raw, honest. Shaq, who rarely found himself at a loss for words, could only mutter, I didn't set the price, ma'am." She scoffed, disbelief in her eyes. "Does that even matter? Your name is on those shoes. You're responsible for it." Shaq could see the anguish in her face. This wasn't about anger or jealousy. This was about disappointment. Guilt gnawed at his gut. Reaching into his pocket, Shaq pulled out a wad of cash, $2,000 he'd earned from a recent promotional appearance. He extended it to her with a genuine sincerity that softened his deep voice. "Here, ma'am, I'm sorry. Please take this. Buy whatever your son needs." For a moment, the woman stared at the cash, her lips quivering. Then, in a move that stunned Shaq, she swatted the money out of his hand. The bills scattered to the ground like confetti. "I don't want your money, Shaquille," she snapped. "I want you to do better. Why can't someone like you make shoes that kids can actually afford?" Shaq froze. The woman's words echoed in his ears like a drumbeat. "Why can't you do better?" She turned sharply, walking away with her head held high, leaving Shaq standing alone in the parking lot. He glanced down at the crumpled bills on the pavement, his mind reeling. The world around him suddenly felt quiet, as if everything had paused to let those words sink in. For the first time in his career, Shaq felt ashamed, not of his success, but of what he might have forgotten along the way. That night, as Shaq sat alone in his home, those words wouldn't leave him. "Why can't you do better?" They were simple, yet they carried the weight of every struggling kid, every hard-working parent, and every dream left out of reach. He sat back in his chair, staring at the pair of Reebok sneakers that sat on the floor, a pair of shoes that bore his name and sold for far more than most families could afford. He had once been the kid who couldn't get what he wanted. Now, he was the man others looked to for hope. And at that moment, Shaquille O'Neal made a vow. "I can do better," he whispered to himself, his massive hands folding together. "I will do better." That was the night Shaq's journey to change the game began. The sun rose quietly over Shaquille O'Neal's sprawling home, but inside, The air was thick with tension. Shaq sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee far too small for his massive hands. He hadn't slept much. His mind was consumed by the woman's words, replaying over and over. Why can't someone like you make shoes that kids can actually afford? He glanced at the Reebok sneakers sitting by the door. They were sleek, stylish, and outrageously expensive. It was hard to ignore the fact that kids all over the country wanted them, but only a fraction of families could actually afford them. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he reached his agent, Leonard Armato. Leonard was not only Shaq's representative, but also one of his closest advisors, a man who knew the ins and outs of endorsement deals. Shaq tapped the call button, and after a few rings, Leonard picked up. "Morning, big man," Leonard greeted. "What's on your mind?" Shaq leaned back in his chair and sighed. "We need to talk, Leonard, about the Reebok deal." There was a pause on the other end. "The Reebok deal? You're not still thinking about walking away from it, are you? Shaq, they're offering millions. Millions, man." "I don't care about the money," Shaq said firmly. Leonard chuckled nervously. "Come on, Shaq. Don't get sentimental on me. You're at the top of your game. You've got a deal with one of the biggest sneaker companies in the world. Why would you throw that away?" Shaq's jaw tightened. He could feel the woman's disappointment like a knot in his chest. "Because I can't keep selling shoes to kids who can't afford them. A lady called me out the other day, man. Said I forgot where I came from, and you know what? She's right. I do remember where I came from. My family struggled. My mama had to choose between paying bills and putting shoes on my feet." Leonard sighed. "Look, I get it. But you're talking about walking away from millions of dollars, Shaq. Deals like this don't come around often." Shaq leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Leonard, I'm not doing it for the money. I want to make affordable shoes for kids. Shoes that any family can buy without stressing over the rent. I'm going to start my own brand, partner with stores that regular folks shop at, and sell my shoes for $20 or $30. Leonard was silent for a moment. "Shaq, you don't know what you're getting into. You'll lose the big deals. People are going to think your shoes are cheap. They'll call them junk. Is that how you want your brand to be remembered?" Shaq didn't hesitate. "I don't care what they call it, as long as the kids are happy." Leonard exhaled heavily. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious." "All right," Leonard relented, his tone softer. "You're the boss, Shaq, but think this through. If you go through with this, there's no turning back." Shaq smiled faintly. "I've already made up my mind." The following week, Shaq flew out to Reebok's headquarters for what was supposed to be a celebratory meeting. The conference room buzzed with excitement as executives filed in, carrying glossy binders and samples of the new sneaker line. Shaq sat at the long table, his massive frame almost making the chair look comically small. "Shaq," one of the executives greeted warmly, "we've got something special for you. This next line of sneakers is going to blow everyone away. The designs are fresh, and we're projecting massive numbers. Kids are going to love these." Shaq looked down at the new designs they slid across the table. The shoes looked incredible, no doubt about it. The craftsmanship, the colors, the style, it was everything a high-end shoe should be, and they'd be expensive. He glanced up, his deep voice cutting through the room. "How much?" The executives exchanged quick glances. "Well, the retail price is set at $150, maybe a little more for the premium models." Shaq sat back, crossing his arms. "That's too much." "Too much?" The lead executive frowned, leaning in. "Shaq, these aren't just sneakers. These are your sneakers. Kids want them because they want to be like you, and they're willing to pay for that." Shaq shook his head. "Not all kids. Not the ones who can't afford it. That's the problem." "Shaq," another executive chimed in, clearly trying to salvage the moment. "This is business. If we want to maintain the brand image, we can't price these shoes lower. It's about prestige." Shaq's voice was steady but firm. I don't care about prestige. I'm out. The room fell silent. What do you mean you're out? Shaq stood up, his towering presence silencing any further protest. I mean, I'm done. I'm walking away. I can't be a part of this anymore. The executives stared at him in disbelief. One of them laughed nervously. You're kidding, right? You're walking away from millions, Shaq. Yeah, Shaq said with a faint smile, but I'm walking towards something better. The lead executive shook his head, frustrated. You're making a mistake, Shaq. A big one. Shaq turned to leave, pausing just before the door. He looked back at the room filled with men in expensive suits, men who couldn't understand his decision. I'm not making a mistake. I'm making a choice. As Shaq walked out of the Reebok headquarters and into the bright sunshine, he felt lighter. He had just walked away from a multi-million-dollar deal, but instead of regret, he felt resolve. In his mind, he could see the face of that woman from the gym, the woman who had thrown his money to the ground and asked him to do better. I hear you, he murmured to himself. I'm gonna do better. And so, with nothing but his vision and the fire in his heart, Shaquille O'Neal took the first step toward creating something no one thought possible: affordable shoes for every kid who dreamed big. The decision to walk away from Reebok didn't just make headlines. It sent shockwaves through the sports and business world. Reporters questioned Shaquille O'Neal's sanity. Analysts called it a career mistake. Fans were divided. Some admired his stance, while others doubted he could deliver on his promise. But Shaq wasn't concerned with the noise. He had a plan, and the next step was finding the right people to bring it to life. One evening, Shaq sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by a small group of advisors: Leonard Armato, his agent, a lawyer, and a handful of trusted business friends. Spread out before them were papers, sketches, and early concept designs of the shoes Shaq envisioned. Leonard tapped a sketch with his pen, frowning. All right, Shaq, let's go over this again. You want to design sneakers that cost what, 20 or 30 bucks? That's almost impossible. Why? Shaq shot back. His deep voice filled the room with authority. They make shoes for cheap overseas all the time. I know what it costs to make a pair of sneakers. Why can't we just cut the middleman, skip the premium markups, and keep it simple? Leonard leaned back in his chair. Because big companies have a system, Shaq. They inflate prices for branding, prestige, and profit. That's why shoes are so expensive. And that's why I'm doing this, Shaq said, his voice unwavering. I don't care about profit margins. I care about those kids who can't afford a $100 shoe. I want shoes in every family's price range. Something the average mom can buy without stressing. The room fell silent as they absorbed Shaq's words. No one doubted his sincerity, but they knew the logistics of pulling this off would be a monumental challenge. Leonard finally sighed. Fine. If you're serious about this, we'll start small. I'll set up meetings with manufacturers and retailers who might work with us. Shaq nodded. Good. And we're going to sell them in stores regular folks shop at, places like Walmart and Kmart. One of the advisors raised an eyebrow. Walmart? Shaq, you're a superstar. Partnering with discount stores might hurt your image. Shaq smiled faintly, shaking his head. My image? Man, I'm not worried about my image. I'm worried about those kids. Over the next few weeks, Shaq and Leonard met with manufacturers and retailers, searching for partners who could bring the vision to life. Many scoffed at the idea of a $20 sneaker. Some laughed outright, saying it couldn't be done without sacrificing quality. One executive from a mid-tier shoe company folded his arms and looked Shaq straight in the eye. Here's the truth, Shaq. Nobody wants to wear cheap shoes. Kids want the fancy stuff because it makes them feel special. That's why your Reebok deal worked so well. Shaq, calm but firm, replied, Kids don't want cheap shoes. They want my shoes, and I'm going to make them proud to wear them. Eventually, after countless rejections, Shaq found a partner willing to take the risk. a small manufacturer who understood his vision and shared his passion. "What's the deal?" Shaq asked the CEO during their final meeting. "We can do it," the CEO said cautiously. "We'll make quality sneakers, but we'll keep costs low by simplifying designs and using efficient materials. You won't get the flashy tech like the big brands, but they'll look good, feel good, and hold up." Shaq grinned. "That's all I need." With the manufacturer on board, Shaq turned his attention to finding retailers. Walmart was at the top of his list. The massive chain had stores in every corner of the country and served millions of working-class families. If Shaq wanted to reach kids from all walks of life, Walmart was the answer. The initial pitch meeting with Walmart's executives was tense. Shaq sat at the head of the table, his towering frame somehow making the polished corporate conference room feel small. "So," the senior buyer began, "you're telling us you want to sell basketball sneakers for $20? "That's right," Shaq said with a nod. "They'll be good quality, affordable, and kids will love them." The buyer frowned slightly, leaning back in his chair. "We don't usually associate celebrity brands with affordable pricing. What makes you think this will work?" Shaq smiled, leaning forward. "Because I know these kids. I grew up like them. I know what it's like to want something and not be able to have it. I'm not about status or hype. I'm about making a difference." The room was quiet for a moment, but Shaq's passion was infectious. Finally, the buyer nodded. "All right, we'll give you a shot. Let's start with a test run and see how it performs." Shaq's heart lifted. This was it. The plan was coming together. Shaq worked closely with the manufacturer to design the first collection of shoes. The designs were simple yet bold. Shoes kids would be proud to wear without breaking their parents' budgets. Shaq insisted on testing prototypes himself, lacing them up and hitting the court to ensure they were comfortable and durable. "Man, if I can play in these, any kid can play in these," he joked, spinning a basketball in his hands during one test run. He also made sure the shoes reflected his personality: fun, energetic, and relatable. He didn't want kids to feel like they were settling for less. Instead, he wanted them to feel like they were stepping into greatness, no matter the price tag. One late night, Shaq sat in his office surrounded by shoe samples. He picked up a pair and ran his hands over the material, feeling the weight of what he was trying to accomplish. He thought of his mother, Lucille, who had worked so hard to give him opportunities. He thought of his stepfather, Philip Harrison, who taught him the value of hard work and humility. And he thought of that woman outside the gym who had thrown his money to the ground and asked him to do better. "This is for you," he whispered to himself. "This is for every kid who dreams big but doesn't have much." As the first production run began, Shaq knew he was taking a risk. The critics would come, and people would doubt him. But that didn't matter. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to himself and to the kids that someone like him could do better. In the quiet hours before dawn, Shaquille O'Neal sat alone in his living room, the faint glow of the city spilling through the windows. Beside him lay the final samples of his new shoes, sleek, simple, and sturdy. He picked one up, turning it over in his massive hands, inspecting every detail. It wasn't flashy like the big-name sneakers, but it was good. It was his. Before heading to his first official meeting to finalize the shoe's launch, Shaq did something he always did when life presented him with a pivotal moment. He called his mother. Lucille O'Neal was the guiding force in Shaq's life. She'd been there through every struggle, sacrifice, and success. She had worked tirelessly as a young mother, raising Shaq alongside his stepfather, Philip Harrison, instilling in him discipline, humility, and a fierce desire to give back. When Shaq dialed her number, her voice came through the phone, warm and familiar. "Hey, baby, you okay?" "Yeah, Mama, I'm good," Shaq said, smiling faintly. "I just wanted to talk to you about something." Lucille immediately picked up on his tone. Something's on your mind." Shaq hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I walked away from my Reebok deal." There was a beat of silence. Then Lucille, always calm, replied, "Why, baby? What happened?" "There was this lady, Mama," Shaq began. He told her the story about the woman outside the gym, the harsh words, the thrown money, and the question that had echoed in his mind ever since. "She asked me why I couldn't make shoes that kids could actually afford. And you know what? She was right. I felt like I was letting those kids down. So I'm starting my own brand. I'm making shoes that'll sell for $20, $30 tops." Lucille listened quietly, absorbing every word. Finally, she said softly, "I'm proud of you, Shaquille." "You are?" Shaq asked, almost surprised. "Of course I am. I raised you to do the right thing. And the right thing isn't always the easy thing," she said. "You remember what it was like growing up. You remember how hard it was for me and your daddy to make ends meet. There were times I couldn't give you everything I wanted to. Do you remember that?" Shaq's mind flashed back to his childhood, his mother working long shifts, his stepfather's unwavering discipline, and the sacrifices they made. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, Mama, I remember." Lucille's voice softened. "Well, there are millions of mothers like me out there, Shaquille. Mothers who just want to see their kids happy, but don't always have the money. You making those shoes affordable? That's going to help those families. And that's what matters." Shaq smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "Thanks, Mama. I needed to hear that." Lucille chuckled. "You don't need me to tell you what to do. You've got a good heart, Shaquille. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." Before they hung up, Shaq promised he'd send her the first pair of shoes off the production line. "You'll have the Shaq Originals," he joked. "I'll wear them proudly," she replied. After the call with his mother, Shaq found himself thinking about his stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, Sarge, as everyone called him. Sarge was a strict but loving man who had shaped Shaq into the disciplined athlete and person he had become. Growing up, money had been tight in their household, but Sarge never let Shaq use that as an excuse. "You work hard for what you want," Sarge would say. "You don't forget where you come from, and you don't leave people behind." Shaq carried those lessons with him throughout his life, but they resonated more now than ever. He wasn't just building a shoe brand, he was honoring Sarge's words, his mother's sacrifices, and his own roots. The first production run was small, just enough to ensure quality and gauge interest. Shaq received a box of the final version of his shoes a few weeks later, and as soon as they arrived, he headed to the local community center where he had spent countless hours playing basketball as a kid. The gym was alive with the sound of sneakers squeaking on hardwood floors and the shouts of kids playing pickup games. Shaq walked in, towering over everyone, carrying a large box. The kids stopped mid-game, eyes wide with excitement. "Shaq's here," one of them yelled, and they swarmed around him, grinning ear to ear. Shaq opened the box and pulled out a pair of the new shoes. "All right, who wants to test these out for me?" Hands shot up in the air, kids bouncing with excitement. Shaq picked a few volunteers, helping them lace up the shoes himself. "All right, now get out there and play. Tell me if they're good enough for y'all to hoop in." The kids hit the court, running, jumping, and shooting, their laughter echoing through the gym. Shaq watched closely, looking for any signs of discomfort or problems with the shoes. To his relief, the kids seemed to love them. One boy, no older than 10, ran up to Shaq after the game, his face flushed with excitement. "Shaq, these are awesome. Are they really gonna cost only $20? "Yep," Shaq said with a grin. "You like 'em?" The boy nodded furiously. "My mom's gonna be so happy. She said we couldn't afford basketball shoes this year, but now I can get these." Shaq felt a lump rise in his throat. "That's what I like to hear, big man. You keep hooping, all right?" The boy beamed, running back to the court. Despite Shaq's excitement, not everyone was on board. When word spread about his plan to sell affordable shoes through stores like Walmart, critics in the sneaker and sports industries were quick to pounce. They're going to look cheap. The brand will never take off. No one's going to wear Shaq shoes if they're not cool. Reporters asked him pointed questions during press conferences. Shaq, aren't you worried that selling budget shoes will hurt your image as a superstar athlete? Shaq's response was always the same. I'm not worried about my image. I'm worried about the kids who look up to me. If I can make shoes they can afford, that's all that matters. He wore his own shoes proudly, sporting them at practices and public events. When someone mocked him for not wearing premium brands, Shaq simply smiled and said, "These are my shoes. I made them for the people who matter." A few days before the official launch, Shaq sent a pair of the shoes to his mother. Lucille called him as soon as they arrived. "Shaquille," she said, her voice full of pride, "these are beautiful. And you know what? You're doing God's work, son. These shoes are going to make so many kids happy." Shaq smiled. "Thanks, Mama. That means everything." And with that, Shaquille O'Neal knew he was ready for what came next. Yadri tones that the day of the launch finally arrived, and Shaquille O'Neal stood in the back of a bustling Walmart in downtown Atlanta. It was one of those ordinary mornings where families came to shop for groceries, school supplies, and everyday essentials, places where people counted every dollar, stretched every paycheck. Shaq had chosen this location for a reason. He wanted to be among the very people he was doing this for, working-class families and kids who didn't have hundreds of dollars to blow on sneakers. Walmart employees wheeled out huge carts stacked with boxes of Shaq's new shoes. A simple display stood proudly near the front entrance, a life-size cutout of Shaq dunking, with bold letters that read, "Shaq Shoes, good quality, great price, for everyone." The shoes, priced at $19.99 and $29.99, were laid out in rows, in all sizes, from kids to adults. There were no premium frills, no hype marketing slogans, no flashy gimmicks, just shoes designed with heart. Shaq adjusted his tie, his massive hands tugging nervously at the fabric. He had faced pressure on the basketball court 1,000 times, but this moment felt bigger, like his entire life had been leading to this. Slowly, shoppers began to notice the display. Some stopped, curiously picking up a shoe to inspect it. "Wait," one father muttered to his wife. "These are Shaq shoes? For $20? Are they real?" the wife asked, flipping the shoe over. Shaq smiled from his hiding spot near the back, watching as families started to take interest. He wasn't here for the cameras today. He didn't want this to be a publicity stunt. He wanted to see the reactions for himself. Suddenly, the sound of children's voices broke through the hum of the store. "Mom, Mom, look, it's Shaq's shoes!" a young boy shouted, clutching a box in his arms. His little brother trailed behind him, carrying another pair. The mother approached the display cautiously, pulling one of the shoes off the rack. "How much are these?" she murmured to herself, expecting the worst. Then her eyes widened as she spotted the price tag. $19.99. Her boys stared up at her, hopeful. "Please, Mom, can we get them?" She hesitated, glancing at the price again, her face softening. "All right, you can each get a pair." "Yes!" the boys shouted, high-fiving each other. Shaq felt his throat tighten as he watched the mother take her boys to the checkout line. He remembered what it was like being that kid, staring at sneakers through store windows, hoping his parents could scrape together enough money to buy him a pair. Now, because of him, families wouldn't have to choose between shoes and groceries. An hour into the launch, Shaq decided to make his presence known. He stepped out from the back and walked toward the display, his towering frame impossible to miss. The reaction was electric. "It's Shaq!" a boy screamed, his voice breaking. Shoppers turned, jaws dropping, as Shaq waved and smiled, making his way to the display. He knelt down beside a group of kids, handing out high fives and signing shoeboxes. "You like these shoes?" he asked one little girl, her eyes wide as saucers. "Yeah," she said shyly, clutching a box in her hands. "You're gonna look fly in those," Shaq grinned. Parents approached him, shaking his hand and thanking him. One mother, tears welling in her eyes, said, "You have no idea what this means to families like mine." "Thank you, Shaq." Shaq simply smiled, his deep voice warm. "Nah, thank you for raising those kids. This is for y'all." By noon, the local media had arrived, cameras in hand. Reporters surrounded Shaq, bombarding him with questions as he signed autographs and interacted with families. "Shaq, some critics are saying these shoes aren't premium enough. How do you respond to that?" one reporter asked. Shaq straightened, towering over the group. "You know what I say to that? I don't care." The reporters exchanged glances, surprised by his bluntness. Shaq continued, his voice steady. "These shoes are for the kids whose parents can't drop $150 on sneakers. They're good quality, they're affordable, and they'll get the job done. I don't need prestige. I need kids to feel proud of what they're wearing." Another reporter chimed in, "But Shaq, aren't you worried that this move could damage your brand as a superstar athlete?" Shaq's expression softened, and he shook his head. "You know, when I was growing up, my mom taught me that your worth isn't in your shoes. It's in your heart. These shoes have heart, and that's all that matters to me. If helping families hurts my brand, so be it." Parents in the crowd erupted into applause, and Shaq smiled, knowing his words weren't just for the cameras, they were the truth. Later that day, someone uploaded a video of Shaq at the launch, kneeling down to tie a young boy's shoelaces as he proudly wore his new Shaq sneakers. The caption read, "Shaq didn't just sell shoes today. He gave families a reason to smile." Within hours, the video went viral. Social media lit up with praise for Shaq, applauding his decision to prioritize people over profits. Shaq is a real one. Finally, someone who gets it. "My son loves his new Shaq shoes. Thank you, big man." But Shaq wasn't in it for the headlines. He was in it for the kids. That night, Shaq sat in his living room, exhausted but fulfilled. He scrolled through photos from the day, kids laughing, parents smiling, families walking out of the store with their arms full of shoeboxes. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mom, Lucille. "I'm so proud of you, Shaquille. I saw the news. You made a lot of families happy today." Shaq smiled, his chest swelling with pride. He thought of his stepfather, Sarge, and how proud he would be too. "Just getting started, Mama," he whispered to himself. Just getting started. Outside, the world was quiet, but Shaq knew the impact of that day would ripple far beyond Atlanta. This was more than just a shoe launch. It was a statement. Every kid deserved to dream big. Every parent deserved to provide without worry. And as long as Shaq had a say, he would keep making that dream a reality. Shaquille O'Neal had expected pushback, but the storm that followed the launch of his $20 sneakers was louder than he imagined. The next morning, headlines plastered sports websites and business news. Shaq's $20 shoes, affordable or just cheap. O'Neal trades quality for charity. Will it last? Shaq sinks to Walmart level. The sneaker culture, obsessed with exclusivity and status, was quick to pounce. Social media was flooded with criticism from so-called sneakerheads and industry influencers. A $20 shoe can't be good, period. Shaq sold out. These belong in the trash, not on the court. No kid wants to be caught dead in budget kicks. Sitting in his office, Shaq scrolled through the comments, his expression unreadable. He wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it sting any less. Leonard Armato, his agent and trusted confidant, called him not long after. "Shaq, we've got a PR problem," Leonard said bluntly. "The media's tearing the shoes apart. They're calling them cheap. They're saying you're ruining your brand." Shaq leaned back in his chair, his deep voice calm but resolute. Let them say what they want, man. You sure? We could spin this, maybe hire someone to boost the image. No, Shaq interrupted. I don't need spin. I don't care what they say about me. I care what those kids are saying. Leonard sighed. All right, big man. Just remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Shaq hung up and stared at the photos pinned to the board across the room. Kids in his shoes, smiling wide, families clutching shoeboxes at Walmart. He whispered to himself, they don't get it yet, but they will. A week later, Shaq decided to return to where it all began. Newark, New Jersey, his hometown. He didn't bring cameras or reporters. He just wanted to connect with the people who mattered most. Dressed in a simple tracksuit and a baseball cap, Shaq arrived at a community center where kids ran around on a cracked basketball court, their sneakers worn down, soles barely holding together. He spotted a group of boys playing a pickup game, their laughter filling the air. Shaq walked over, towering over the kids as they stopped mid-play, jaws dropping. "Y'all mind if I join?" he asked with a grin. "It's Shaq," one of the boys screamed, dropping his ball. Within minutes, Shaq was in the game, dribbling clumsily, on purpose, and letting the kids block his shots. Their laughter echoed across the court as he played along, making exaggerated dives and missing easy layups. When the game ended, Shaq sat on the court with the kids huddled around him. He reached into a bag and pulled out boxes of his new shoes. "I brought y'all something." The boys' eyes widened. "For real?" Shaq handed out pairs to each of them, watching as they eagerly slipped on the shoes, their faces lighting up. "What do you think?" he asked. One boy looked up at him, grinning ear to ear. "They're awesome, Shaqy. Way better than my old ones." He pointed to his worn-out sneakers, the soles flapping like a broken hinge. Shaq ruffled the boy's hair. "Good. These are made for hoopin', man. Just like y'all." An older man, likely a coach, approached Shaq and shook his hand. "You know, Shaq, you're doing something important here. Don't let the critics get to you. These kids don't care about price tags. They care about playing the game and looking up to you." Shaq nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deep in his heart. "I'm just getting started, coach." While Shaq stayed grounded in his mission, the sneaker industry remained relentless. Pundits called his shoes a gimmick, claiming no real athlete would wear them. Critics insisted the shoes wouldn't last a season on the court, but Shaq had a plan. At his next NBA game, Shaquille O'Neal walked onto the court wearing his shoes. The cameras zoomed in, commentators whispered in disbelief, and social media exploded. "He's wearing his Walmart shoes. Is he serious? Shaq's really hooping in $20 sneakers? They'll fall apart in 5 minutes." But they didn't. Shaq played like a man possessed. He dunked, blocked shots, and ran the floor with ease, his shoes holding up just fine. After the game, reporters swarmed him, eager to ask the question on everyone's mind. "Shaq, you really wore your $20 shoes tonight. Why?" Shaq grinned, sweat dripping down his face. "Because I believe in them. They're for the kids who can't afford the $100 brands. And guess what? They work just fine." The video of Shaq dominating the game in his own shoes went viral. Kids and parents who had once hesitated began buying the shoes in droves. Days after the game, Shaq started receiving letters, hundreds of them, from parents, kids, and coaches. One letter stood out. It was from a single mother in Detroit. "Dear Shaq, my son came home today with your shoes, and for the first time, he wasn't embarrassed about what he was wearing. He told me, 'Shaq wears these shoes, so they're cool. I work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and I can't always buy him what the other kids have. But you made it possible for him to feel like he belongs. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart.'" Shaq sat quietly as he read the letter, his vision blurring with emotion. This was why he had started this journey. This was why he ignored the critics. That evening, he called his mother. "Hey, Mama," he said, his voice soft. "Shaquille," Lucille replied warmly. "How's my boy doing?" "I'm good, Mama. You were right. This isn't easy, but it's worth it." Lucille's voice filled with pride. "You keep doing what's right, Shaquille. God will take care of the rest." As word spread, demand for Shaq's shoes soared. Walmart shelves emptied faster than they could restock, and families across the country praised Shaq for what he had done. Critics, too, began to change their tune. One major sports outlet ran a new headline: "Shaq's shoes, more than just sneakers, a revolution for the kids." Shaq didn't care about the praise, though. He cared about the kids who no longer felt left out, the parents who could afford to buy their children something special, and the communities where his shoes were making a real difference. Tandalijo, late one night, as Shaq sat back in his chair, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few weeks, he smiled to himself. The critics had called his shoes cheap, but the kids had called them cool. And to Shaq, that was all that mattered. The morning was calm, with the sun rising slowly over a packed Walmart parking lot in Los Angeles. Shaquille O'Neal sat quietly in the back seat of his SUV, watching families stream into the store. It had been months since the launch of his affordable shoe line, and what began as an uncertain gamble had become something far bigger. Shaq adjusted his tracksuit, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. As he walked toward the entrance, people noticed. Kids gasped, adults whispered, and a murmur spread like wildfire. "It's Shaq!" Inside the store, the display for Shaq's shoes stood tall and proud. Row upon row of sneakers, priced at $19.99 and $29.99, neat and ready to be picked up. Shaq's cardboard cutout loomed large, but the real man in front of them made the moment unforgettable. He grinned as he approached, towering over everyone, and immediately knelt down to interact with the kids running up to him, wide-eyed and starstruck. "Y'all good? Let me see what you're picking up," Shaq said, pulling boxes from their hands and signing them. "Shaq, you're really here?" one boy asked, clutching a shoebox tightly against his chest. "Yeah, big man, I'm here," Shaq replied with a smile. "Had to make sure you guys were taken care of." Parents gathered nearby, whispering thanks, their voices filled with genuine emotion. One mother approached cautiously, holding her daughter's hand. "Shaq, I just wanted to say thank you. I work 2 jobs, and I've never been able to buy my kids fancy sneakers. But these? I can afford these. My little girl's proud to wear your name." Shaq knelt down, meeting the mother's eyes with a sincerity few could match. "You're the real MVP, ma'am. You're out here making it happen for your kids. I just did my small part." Moments like these made every doubt, every critic, and every negative headline fade into the background. Shaq's shoes were no longer just sneakers. They were symbols of pride, of opportunity, of belonging. For every kid who slipped on a pair, they weren't cheap shoes. They were Shaq's shoes. They were something to be proud of, something that connected them to the towering man who cared enough to remember where he came from. But the journey to this moment had not been easy. While Shaq's shoes flew off the shelves at Walmart and other retail chains, the sneaker industry's biggest names still tried to undermine him. Competitors mocked the shoes' simplicity, calling them generic, while analysts dismissed their success as temporary. Shaq didn't fight back with words. He fought back with actions. To silence the doubters, he took his message straight to the people. Shaq visited community centers, schools, and courts in neighborhoods just like the one he'd grown up in. Everywhere he went, he carried boxes of his sneakers, handing them out to kids who had never owned a brand new pair of shoes. He stayed for hours, playing basketball, cracking jokes, and reminding the kids that greatness didn't come from wearing a name. It came from the person wearing the shoes. "You don't need to wear expensive sneakers to feel like a star," Shaq told a group of kids one afternoon, holding up a pair of his shoes. "What matters is how you play, how you live, and how you treat people." These shoes ain't just for basketball, they're for dreams. The critics began to quiet. One after another, sports writers admitted they had underestimated Shaq's vision. Analysts revised their predictions, and headlines began to shift. Shaq proves affordable shoes can have heart. 400 million pairs sold. Shaq's sneakers are here to stay. But for Shaq, it wasn't about the numbers or the praise. It was about the stories that came back to him. Letters, messages, and small moments that reaffirmed his decision to do better. There was the single father in Chicago who could finally buy his son a pair of new basketball shoes. There was the little girl in Houston who told Shaq she wore his sneakers to her first basketball tryout and made the team. And then one day, Shaq found himself outside a gym, just like the one where his journey had begun. He sat quietly on a bench, watching kids play a pickup game, their feet pounding the court in his shoes. A woman approached him, a mother, probably in her early 40s, her face kind but worn with life's struggles. "Shaq?" she asked hesitantly. He looked up and smiled. "Hey there. What's up?" The woman nodded toward her son, who was racing up and down the court, wearing a pair of Shaq shoes with pride. "That's my boy," she said softly. "I bought those shoes last week, and you know what he said. He said, 'Mom, Shaq wears these shoes, so they're good enough for me?'" Shaq's heart swelled as he watched the boy sink a jumper, his face beaming with confidence. "Your boy's a baller," Shaq said warmly. The woman smiled. "Thank you, Shaq, for not forgetting people like us." Shaq stood, towering over the court as he watched the next generation play, dream, and grow. He had walked away from millions of dollars, endured mockery, and fought an uphill battle to get here. But now, as he saw kids everywhere lacing up his shoes, he knew he had done the right thing. This was his legacy, not just as an athlete, but as a man who cared enough to give back. "Yeah," Shaq said quietly to himself, the voices of the kids ringing in the background. "I did good." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Shaq O'Neal walked away, not as a giant of the game, but as a giant of the people,